Hey guys, welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about the 2020 presidential election as of October 24th, 2020. So we're going to take a look at the Electoral Map, do an update on the Electoral Map, take a look at the key swing states, and answer the big question, who is winning this presidential election? But before we get started, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content and be up to date with the latest unbiased election news. So let's get started. So we're gonna begin by showing you guys the current electoral map, and we're gonna fill it in. So right now, the Democratic Party has somewhat of an edge with their safe states. So that's where we're going to begin. Their safe states at this point are safe. And that sounds very counterintuitive because you would think that, the states that are safe, they are always safe. However, for this election cycle, the Republicans have had somewhat of a struggle of keeping states they were winning by safe margins, usually at those margins. So now we're seeing these races, for example, in South Carolina, in the race in Montana. At the presidential level, which the margins are narrowing down for the Republicans. The Democrats haven't had that problem. And if anything, they're actually doing a pretty good job at just winning their safe states, solidifying them, and truly not having any problems of going there and winning there. Now, this to say that the Democrats, their trends have kind of stopped to going the way that they were going. However, these safe states are going to be safe by over 15% for the Democratic Party. However, this does not reflect what the entire map might look for them. And I mean, like I was saying, comparatively, the Republicans do not have as many safe states because they've lost some of the momentum they had there, and just because, generally speaking, some of them do not like Donald Trump, and you have those Republicans that are the anti-Trump Republicans, the ones that aren't really populist in a way. And you also have just that big group of people, in addition to some of the people that were independent voters in these crucial states for the Republicans, which are safe states. Because again, these are the backbones of these parties. The Democrats, they do not win in California, New York, and Illinois, they're dead. If the Republicans don't win in places like a lot of their smaller states, again, that shows that they're in a bad position nationwide when it comes to a lot of the momentum and things like that. However, the Republicans do have some good news. I mean, even though they've gotten a little bit down in some of their safe states, quote unquote, depending on what you would call them today, they are doing very well as we get later onto the map where they're starting to improve a lot. So the current electoral map is 100 electoral votes for the Republicans and 190 for the Democrats, which will fall under the safe category, or in other words, a margin of around 15% or more. So now that we filled in those states, let's talk about the contested states, or the states that really have at least somewhere from a small to a pretty good chance of going to either party. So right now, there's a lot of states that are not filled in, and some of these states, they're pretty self-explanatory of who they're going to go to. Some not that much. However, these states, they truly do have a chance, the ones that are not filled in, of going to either party in the extreme scenarios, which is something we will be talking about in another video. So let's start by going through the Republicans' likely states, or states they will win from a margin of 5 to 15%. So right now, a lot of the states that fall under this column are those Republican states I was talking about. Very, very strongly, traditionally Republican states. In past elections have voted Republican for a long time. And truly, we haven't had very big demographic changes. Some of them have. However, these states still do have that Republican base to hold on to them to go to the Republicans by a margin of 5 to 15%. So what we're seeing here? Those states that I just mentioned. And these are all in that contested margins, in this case, the likely margin, for many different reasons. For example, in Alaska, we have a lot of third-party vote that has started to flip from the president. And remember, in 2016, we had an election where a lot of both candidates were so unpopular in a way that there was a lot of third-party vote. There was a lot of support for Gary Johnson. There was a lot of support for Dr. Stein. So that is the first thing to keep in mind. And in a state like Alaska, they really love voting third-party. Those third-party voters are flipping from those third-party candidates. Some of them going to Biden. that is something that's very interesting, and that definitely narrowed down the race here. We're looking at Donald Trump winning in Alaska by anywhere from 7 to probably 13%. Now, going on to a state like Missouri, we're seeing here, and the same thing in South Carolina, very big drifts in the, first of all, in the African American population. These states have somewhat of a pretty good amount of African American population. So I think that that momentum from that group, which has tended to go more Democratic, and we're seeing a lot of turnout in these races, the Democrats are doing pretty well in these states. In addition to that, we have some suburban voters which are starting to flip from the Republicans to the Democrats. And generally speaking, that's what we're seeing in this race, in these races. That state, these states are going to narrow down a little bit because you have a lot of demographics change and things like that. I mean, especially in South Carolina, but that also applies to Missouri. And out of this, these likely seats for the Republicans, I would guess that the most weird, I mean, not as traditional, like reason for changing is the state of Montana. Here in the state of Montana, they are very, 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 very they're conservative. However, they're pretty moderate at the same time. They've elected senators from the Democratic Party, and in the past years, and there's a very interesting Senate race here that's going to help Biden with some momentum. In addition to that, Trump is not the most popular figure in Montana. I mean, no, like in Montana, they really they're somewhat bipartisan. So I mean, it's gonna narrow down a little bit, especially since you have that state Bullock race. Although a lot of people are voting Trump Bullock, which is something very interesting. However, the margins will definitely decrease from what you guys saw in 2016 in these states. So those are the Republican likely states. What about the Democratic likely states where they would be winning by a margin of 5 to 15%? The Democrats have a lot, and they had a lot a couple weeks ago. This is where the Democrats have started losing a little bit of their momentum. And at this point in time, there's some of these races that could have actually gone by there's these very big substantial margins to the Democrats and very decisive factors. I mean, by over 5%. And truly over the last couple of days, after the last debate, all those different things have had some impacts. We're noticing the Democrats have maybe lost the grip in at least some of the states that had likely, most notably in the Rust Belt, and I would say also the state of Nevada. But let's talk about the states the Democrats are currently winning by a likely margin. So here we have 3 states Hillary Clinton won in 2016. And I will also add the state of Minnesota. That's another state that she won in 2016. So these states have solid Democratic bases. They went to Clinton in 2016 in an election year where she was pretty much downhill the last couple of days of the election. And these states have been trending more Democratic with some House races that we're seeing more Democratic. And just in recent polling data that we have, they're not even polling these states that much because they're going by such decisive factors over 7%. Colorado, some of the most recent polls, +9. And just looking at some of the trends, I think this easily goes to Biden. Virginia is a state where Donald Trump has gained somewhat of momentum. However, they're not contesting it that much. And in addition to that, Joe Biden is polling very well there. So that state, I would say, definitely not as going. It's not going to be as contested. And at this point in time, President Trump is not doing too great there. So that probably would go to Biden by a margin of more than 5%. And taking a look at the 2 other states, for example, New Hampshire. Here we have a lot of that small town population. Those are the voters that traditionally are somewhat on the more bipartisan side, on the more kind of conservative but moderate side. Those voters do not like Donald Trump that much, but Donald Trump does have his base here. So this state, the Republicans haven't really contested it because, again, it's a small price. They're somewhat low on money in certain ways, and they have to pick strategically where they're going to place their assets. And at this point, the state of New Hampshire is a state they decided to give up. And at this point, probably going to the Democrats by more than 5%. And most interestingly, in the state of Minnesota, if you would have asked me a couple days, the couple days of, after the pandemic started, when Donald Trump was on his approval ratings high, some of the highest polls he's been all during his presidency, and you would have told me, oh, Minnesota is going to be going by likely margins, I wouldn't have believed you. But I mean, after the pandemic, after the Black Lives Matter movement, which really have had impacts on this election, especially in the state of Minnesota, where it pretty much sparked those movements, we're seeing the Democrats do pretty well there. And we're seeing polling numbers in the range of 6 to 7% after the debates, and the Democrats, that's where they're settling. This state, Donald Trump could possibly win in certain aspects if turnout for the Democrat in their Democratic areas is low, and they're actually flipping some suburban voters as well as the more conservative West Minnesotan voters. So that is something to keep in mind. However, at this point in time, the chances of flipping there are going to be very low. So those are all the likely states for this election. Let's talk about the lean states for this presidential election, or states that would go from 1.5% to 5%. So let's start off with the Democrats. The Democrats currently have a lot of lean states, and they're in the tip of the iceberg in some of them. Right now, the election is really going to come down to this. If Biden kind of messes up and walks a little bit over the plank, that big solidified victory that we could have said he had might be completely out the window. That is something we must analyze. And where are these states? It's pretty much Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, where we could say Biden is winning by around a margin of maybe 2 to 3, maybe 4% in the Rust Belt. In Arizona, it's like 1.5%, 2%. In Nevada, it's almost by a similar margin than in the Rust Belt. So keep that in mind. So these states are probably going to flip. And here's the thing. We're seeing a lot of Trump momentum in all 5 of these states. However, the margins for Donald Trump, for example, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania were very little in 2016. 10,000 votes up to like around the 70,000 votes range. Keep that in mind. That is something that's very, very crucial. And truly, for the Democrats, it's not that hard to flip. However, we must analyze, and there is a possibility, and I'm going to make a video about this, about talking about Donald Trump's pathways to the victory, that the Rust Belt actually might go to him, because we're seeing very strong momentum with early voting. We're seeing very, very strong momentum for Trump. However, at this point in time, these races have definitely narrowed up a lot in the last couple of days, and we're seeing Biden only leading here now by, I would say, 3 to 4%. Going down to Arizona, which is a very interesting state, I would say that at this point in time, it's going to be something that we're seeing that in the state that the Democrats are going to start to lose some momentum. And Joe Biden, one thing that was driving him there was Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly was performing very well in the Senate race. I know Senate and presidential races don't have anything to do, but Mark Kelly has lost momentum because he has recently had a scandal, which again, I will make a video about that soon, talking about senatorial races. However, in the state of Arizona, Donald Trump is within striking distance. He is not that far behind. Recent polls, +2 for Biden. So take that as you want. And I think at this point in time, a Trump victory in Arizona is not impossible. However, at this point, Trump is leading, or Biden is leading by around a margin of 2%. And in the state of Nevada, this is a state that's very interesting because you would think Hillary Clinton won here in 2016, and Hispanic turnout must be through the roof. Now, what are we seeing here? The suburban voters, especially people who did not live near or in Las Vegas, we're seeing very strong turnout for the Republicans, especially in the Reno area. And generally speaking, that really helps out Donald Trump. In addition to some of the Las Vegas suburban voters are sticking with President Donald Trump, and that's going to narrow up the race a little bit more. We could have seen this race go by 7%. However, it started to narrow up in the last couple of days. Donald Trump's doing a pretty good job campaigning here. However, it's probably not going to be enough. Probably Joe Biden's going to win here by a pretty hefty margin. Comparatively to what Clinton won in 2016, probably like 4% is what we're looking at. So those are the Democratic lean states, the states that would win from 1.5% to 5%. What about the Republicans? The Republicans have, I think, a pretty good chunk of these states. I would say it's mostly the state of Texas, the state of Iowa, the state of Ohio. And at this point, those are the states that I think right now the Republicans are winning by a lean margin, falling into those margins. So these, again, are states that traditionally have been very, very Republican. These are states that usually go by a pretty good margin for them, and they have the Republican bases. For example, in the state of Texas, we haven't had a Democratic winner in years. And in states like Iowa and Ohio, Barack Obama won here, but it's because he was such a strong, very moving candidate, which is something that Joe Biden does not have. And in these states, which are just traditionally very Republican, you have to have African-American turnout through the roof. You're going to have very good appeal to some of the rural voters, which is something that Biden does not have. And at this point in time, just looking at some of the recent polls, we're seeing Trump leading. And I think a victory for President Donald Trump in these states is pretty likely at this point in time. Now, in the state of Texas, I think that former Vice President Biden shot himself in the foot with the oil industry comments during the last debate. That's going to have a very big impact in Texas because, again, Texas's economy runs mostly on oil. That is something that you have to understand. That's going to hit a lot of Texans really hard. And a lot of those independents, especially like suburban Houston voters, which are the key groups of voters, one of them that the Democrats won in 2018 to have Beto work so close to that Senate seat, a lot of those voters are going to say they don't want to vote for Joe Biden because of how he wants to move and phase out oil, which for those oil industries in Texas, which is a pretty big part of the economy, that's not the best comment. So, I mean, this state isn't as crucial for the race for the Democrats, so it's not going to matter that much. However, that probably increases Trump's margins from maybe a 3% margin to more almost like a 4% margin. So that is something very interesting we must keep in mind. And overall, the Republicans have these states where they're performing very well. Now, the question becomes, where are the Republicans going to be able to carry by larger margins? And truly, what are the realistic pathways for a Trump victory? And I mean, they have to win all these seats for winning now, plus some more to even have a chance of victory. So those are all the lean states for also the Republican Party. Now let's go on and talk about the tilt states and the 2 congressional districts, which are also be in the tilt margins, or states that would narrowly go by less than 1.5% for either side of the aisle. And right now, I would say this is a pretty bold prediction. The Republicans are leading in all of these tilt states by narrow margins. And I would say the Democrats probably would be leading in Nebraska's second. And I would say the Democrats would be losing in Maine's second congressional district very narrowly. So let's talk about this. For example, in the state of Florida, why am I saying calling this for Trump right now? And why am I calling this by a tilt margin? This could actually be more. However, what are we seeing? The Democrats have pretty low turnout in early voting and in mail-in voting, which is some data that we have. And again, the data is not precise as we don't have the results, but with estimates like considering party registration and all of that, yeah, the Democrats need 700,000 votes, a net 700,000 vote lead to have a chance of winning Florida come election day. So that's something that we must keep in mind. So with that, I mean, the Democrats currently are leading only by 300,000 votes because they have a 500,000 vote lead in mailing voting, and in early in-person voting, the Republicans have a lead of 300,000 votes. So that evens out to a 200,000 vote lead for the Democrats. Which is or 300,000, or it's 200,000 for in-person voting for the Republicans lead. So my bad. So if we're looking at that, I mean, the Democrats have like if those numbers continue until election day, Democrats are going to have a pretty tough time winning here, and they really need those numbers like they usually are. Those in-person early voting and mailing votings to be through the sky. Republicans are doing a very good job at getting those numbers. So I think at this point, the state of Florida, along with that Trump excitement and enthusiasm, might be going to the president. In Georgia, again, this is a state where it's going to take a very strong Democratic candidate to win here. And the Democrats haven't really been campaigning here. And at this point in time, Trump is doing pretty well in the state. He's holding on to those couple of voters, and Biden hasn't campaigned here in the last couple of days. So I think that's something very crucial to keep in mind, as those voters might just go in and just stick with the president, especially those suburban areas of Atlanta, which are the biggest areas which the Republicans need to hold on to win in the state of Georgia. And I think they're probably going to narrowly do that, even though the polls currently have Biden narrowly ahead. In the state of North Carolina, this is another state that's very interesting. We've seen a very big influx of college-educated voters. However, at this point in time, I would say that the president might be narrowly leading here. He has that base that he has in North Carolina with a lot of the more rural support and along with some of the suburban support. And what we're seeing in this state is something very interesting. The Democrats need to get African-American turnout through the roof. And at this point in time, that's something that could definitely happen. But some African Americans are flipping towards Trump, and that is something that, I mean, happens every election. However, I think it's going to be somewhat harder for Biden to win here if he cannot get those African American communities to go out and vote for him in the masses. So that's something else we have to keep in mind. And generally speaking, the president has pretty good support in the state of North Carolina. And with some of the recent polling data, it's become very tight. And the president probably has a lot more enthusiasm, which really will help them. Because again, a lot of people don't factor in enthusiasm, which that is something I factor in when I make my predictions. Enthusiasm is something very important because, again, it's because of voter enthusiasm that Hillary Clinton didn't win in 2016. Keep that in mind. So those are all the states called. Going on to the 2 congressional districts, it's pretty simple. In the state of in Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, we're seeing a very, very interesting race. I mean, it's going to be close since we don't have that much data from here. However, this district is pretty conservative usually, and at this point in time, I think Biden has it in him to win here. And in Maine's 2nd congressional district, Donald Trump won here in 2016, and they are turning a little bit more conservative up there in that part of the state of Maine. So I think Trump should be able to win there. So overall, that was my 2020 election prediction as of October 24th, 2020. And I hope you guys enjoyed it and you guys found it informative. And tell me what you guys think down in the comments. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And I'll see you guys soon in my next video. Bye.